Welcome to this new episode of the Danube Institute podcast. And this is the third and perhaps the last in our series on the June-July French elections, which have just finished 2 days ago. Now they are over, we're here to do a post-mortem on them. So my name is Callum Nicholson. I am Director of Research at the Danube Institute. And we're very pleased to be joined today by Daniel Mahoney, who's Professor Emeritus at Assumption University, a Senior Fellow at the Claremont Institute, a senior writer at Law and Liberty, and a specialist on French political philosophy. We're also joined by Eszter Soós, a political scientist and senior lecturer at Milton Friedman University in Budapest, and an editor of a site focused on French politics. Well, welcome both. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very
much. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So first of all, I mean, the result is a shocking one, at least for me. And my first question to you both, starting with Daniel, is were you surprised by the outcome?
Not particularly. I think once the electoral alliance was made between the Macronists and the New Popular Front, essentially that they would all stand down in districts where they were competing against a national rally or allied candidate, then I think it was pretty clear that even if the national rally got a sizable part of the vote, they ended up with their Republican allies getting about 37% of the vote. The New Popular Front, on the other hand, everyone's talking about a leftist victory. They got 25% of the vote. So this is all the result of this electoral deal. I think the center in France, Macron, the people around him, really succumbed to a kind of hysteria about what Alain Finkielkraut has called the brown plague, that headlines that, the danger of real right-wing government for the first time since World War II and all of this thing. And so first you had the less radical leftist parties, including the socialists, completely putting themselves under the tutelage of the France Insoumise, the Mélenchon's more radical party. And then you had the center essentially forming an electoral alliance to stop the extrême droite, as everyone uniformly calls them. And so the end result has been an electoral result that artificially empowered the left and in many ways has given a front seat to the extreme gauche. So I'm not surprised. I really expected a very different outcome as of Tuesday evening. Once Tuesday evening's deal unfolded, then I think it was pretty clear that they would succeed in stopping the national rally from getting anything close to an absolute rally. And, if you look at the final electoral results, the New Popular Front are, 15 or 18 seats ahead of the presidential majority, and they're 15 or 18 seats ahead of the National Rally and its allies. And then the Republicans, actually, the wing of the Republicans that didn't form an electoral alliance with the National Rally, did respectably about 45 seats. So it's I think it would help if the media talked a little bit about who voted for whom, rather than just the number of seats in Parliament, because there was no swing of opinion from last week to Sunday. It was simply a result of these electoral machinations, which, as I said, worked.
Eszter?
I mean, it was a surprise and it wasn't, because if you take a look at the predictions before the first round and on the eve of the first round, it was more like a National Assembly majority, if not absolute majority, but a majority. However, if you watched carefully and took a look at the predictions on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before the second round, you could see that after the electoral alliance, the coordination between the Macron party or parties and the left, you could see that the Macron party, for the sake of simplicity, is going upwards, so going towards 150 mandates, and the National Rally was coming down. One of the predictions said 205 or something like that. And I think what happened is that these predictions were created on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the tendency continued well into the weekend. And at the end of the day, on Sunday, these two tendencies met each other. So it means that the Macron camp managed to overtake the National Rally camp, and that's how the electoral result was created. And I would also say that if you understand the logic of the French electoral system, which is an absolute majority electoral system, you understand that the parties, the political camps that can strike deals, even if technical deals with others, are at an advantage. So they will always gain more mandates than the camps that have less possibilities or occasions to forge such alliances, even if it's the famous so-called Republican Front. And I think it's also important to mention that this famous Republican Front, we always say in political analysis that this front is weakening from election to election. And if you watch carefully the results of this election, you will see that the National Rally went from 89 mandates to 143 mandates. So if you take a look at the big picture, and if you don't compare the result to previous expectations, you will see that the tendency continues. The Republican Front still exists. It works. It is able to push the National Rally under 200 mandates in Parliament. However, it is not as strong as before because the National Rally is able to construct its parliamentary presence, to gain more votes and go from 89 to 143. So I think that after this election, when the government is formed, when scholars, scientists will start to analyze this election in depth, we are going to find very interesting things to analyze. And one of the things that we have to analyze is how the electorates react to this Republican Front, which has been in place for 20, 25 years now, and its strength changes over time, and we will have to see how it changes actually.
Do you both think that Macron is sitting at home now feeling vindicated or feeling regretful?
I think despite the fact that, there's something, again, very artificial and unnatural about the presidential majority, which, don't forget, is a coalition of three parties, the Renaissance, Ensemble, Macron's party, but two other parties, Modem and Horizon. They finished third in the vote, and again, the electoral alliance with the New Popular Front allowed them to beat the National Rally in terms of parliamentary seats. But I think Macron is very discredited in his own ranks by this decision to dissolve the National Assembly and call an immediate election without much thought, and again, with no consultation of anyone except two or three people in his inner circle. I think as I said in my opening remarks, I think the end result of this increasingly artificial Republican arc is to empower the most extremist political movement in France today, namely France Insoumise, led by Mélenchon. I noticed today that the editorialist in Le Figaro compared the program of France Insoumise, which has been adopted by the more moderate parties in the New Popular Front, as worthy of Hugo Chavez. So I think this deep hostility to Israel. There was France Insoumise has flirted with 100% taxation for people who make over 400,000 euros. There is a practical alliance between the hard left and the Islamists, et cetera, et cetera. So to come back to Eszter's point about whether the Republican arc will hold, I think people have to ask themselves, do the center and center-right parties want to form an artificial alliance with the hard left to hold at bay a political movement which is, Marine Le Pen's party is not the party of her father. And if the centrist and rightist parties were at all attentive to issues that matter to many French people, like immigration, like the cultural threat posed by a certain kind of Islamism, then I think the National Rally wouldn't do as well. So no, I think Macron, despite a kind of superficial and artificial electoral success, or at least not disaster, I think he is at a very, I mean, France may be ungovernable for a long time to come. There are three entrenched blocs. Any coalition government is going to be very artificial and probably short-lived. One could foresee the return, I think Eszter may have mentioned this during our last discussion, of those short-lived coalitions that existed at the end of the Third Republic and during the Fourth Republic between 1946 and 1958. So no, I think Macron is in a very, very difficult position right now, and he's not popular, and his own partisans are increasingly disillusioned with him.
Thank you, Eszter.
I would like to add one thing to the France Unbowed, donc La France Insoumise, is that obviously there is this left-wing alliance that we are talking about, Le Nouveau Front Populaire, but I think that Macron is counting on its end. What I want to say is that I think he is waiting with the nomination of a new government. He is trying to, give time to time, as they say in France, in order for this new left front to fall apart because of programmatic debates, for example, on Ukraine, Gaza, Palestine, and things like that, or even on the issue of the premiership. If you take a look at the French press today, we are discussing these things on Tuesday. It is already beginning. There are candidates and self-candidates, and the discussions and the tensions are slowly coming out. So I think that Macron will wait and see whether this left-wing alliance can come apart without his help, and I think he will make sure that if it needs a little nudge or help, he will provide that nudge or help. So he will try to create a bigger coalition with the moderates without La France Insoumise. I also think, I do agree that whatever coalition or whatever minority government comes out of this whole process, it's going to be very vulnerable. And I think that we can kind of bet that either the government will fall in the National Assembly, or that we will have another dissolution in 1 year or later, because it is very hard, or maybe I don't have the imagination, but it is very hard to see a scenario where this National Assembly can continue for 3 years. Just to remind ourselves that the previous National Assembly functioned for 2 years with a bigger minority government. So they had 250, 60 mandates that votes in the National Assembly, and it was very, very difficult. They had to use every tool and trick the Constitution provides. So this situation is more vulnerable. Nobody has more than 200 votes, so it's going to be very difficult to govern France. Now, when it comes to Macron, obviously, from one perspective, he can be happy, because those same predictions before and right after the first round said that it is also possible that he would have under 100 mandates with his party's, well, his camp in the National Assembly. And now it's around 150. So it's a better result than they could have hoped for without this technical coordination. So this is a result which is not glorious, which is not a victory, but it's a smaller loss than it was expected, and the central bloc still exists. Obviously, the central bloc is also on the verge of falling apart, because everybody thinks about 27, the next presidential election. Edouard Philippe, Gabriel Attal, and others are preparing their political future. So the fact that indeed Macron lost a lot of his credibility and authority will kind of encourage these politicians to continue on this path, which will make even this central bloc more vulnerable. And I think that Macron can also be sad from his perspective, because he's losing power. whatever happens, he's losing power. Even if it's a technical government, even if it's a grand coalition, he's going to lose power because the center of power is going to move to the National Assembly. Because whatever the president decides, if it necessitates budget or other legislative action, it will obligatorily will have to pass the parties and the discussions of the parties. So it's a very visible loss of power for Emmanuel Macron. And I also think that, and I do agree that he loses his magic, his authority, even among his own camp. There is a wide range of incomprehension as to what he's doing and why he's doing what he's doing. And I think that the most visible thing is the leaders of this political camp, Gabriel Attal or even Edouard Philippe, who don't shy away from criticizing him in public. So, you know, this whole Gaullist system, this whole constitution is built on presidential authority, and now this presidential authority is damaged. So this is also an aspect that we will have to pay attention to, because, the logic of decision-making in government and in parliament is often built on this authority. And if this authority doesn't function, other provisions, of course, in the constitution can, solve the situation, but it can be very, very difficult and painful. So that would also raise the question of the new election, the fall of eventual fall of governments and things like that. So it's going to be very tumultuous because of this, the status, the situation of the president as well.
Caleb, could I just respond to a few things Eszter said? I think Eszter's absolutely right that Macron and his allies are going to do their best. They're going to wait to see that if the forces of disruption and disillusion within the leftist coalition work themselves out and personal ambitions and all of that. But I don't think it's going to be as easy as they think, because as I tried to suggest in my opening remarks, first, the more moderate elements in the leftist coalition almost immediately subordinated themselves to France unbowed. And so Mélenchon became the spokesman of this coalition, and other more moderate figures like the socialist leader Raphael Glucksmann, the son of André Glucksmann, the Nouvelle Philosophe, and others. They, again, so carried away, you might say, by the need to keep the National Rally at bay that they sort of allowed the hard left to become the driving force within, or at least the most prominent voice and presence within the leftist coalition. And then I think the electoral alliance that the Macronists formed with the New Popular Front did the same thing in a way. They formed a very limited and practical but effective and short-term alliance with the left, a left increasingly driven by Mélenchon and François Insoumis. So then just a week later to say, oh, we didn't really all mean all this, and now the real danger comes from François Insoumis, and we've got to keep them out of a center-left government. I don't think it's going to be very easy to do. The other point I wanted to pick up, which is a very important one that Eszter had made, is that the Constitution of the Fifth Republic was not made for cohabitation. Cohabitation, by the way, was a journalistic phrase adopted in the mid-'80s. And really, the hardcore Gaullists in the mid-'80s opposed cohabitation because they thought it was fundamentally at odds with the spirit and letter of the Constitution of the Fifth Republic, because it would diminish the power of the presidency. And the whole Gaullist Republic was aimed at, in a way, establishing the presidency as the vehicle for the unity of the nation, the prime minister who would govern effectually on a day-to-day basis, but subordinate to the president of the republic. When you have cohabitation, there's almost immediate diminishment of presidential authority. And in one of our previous sessions, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet referred to, as many commentators have done, the Jupiterian ambitions and presence of Macron. Macron is in no way a Gaullist in the sense that he is indebted to de Gaulle's ideas or his political philosophy or anything of the sort, but he likes the idea of the imperial presidency, the Jupiterian presidency. And so I think the movement from Jupiterian ambitions to really a sort of subordinate presence in a polity increasingly directed from the Assemblée Nationale, it's going to be very hard for Macron. he's going to look diminished as a result. I think a man with a sort of different understanding of presidential authority might be able to handle it better. But I'm not sure Macron has prepared himself for what cohabitation would really entail.
It's quite striking to me as a Brit, and given we also went through an election in the last few days, the parallels between Macron and Rishi Sunak. Neither of them seem to have particularly good political instincts, or perhaps they're playing four-dimensional chess with themselves. I'm not sure. Do you see anything in the parallel? Is it something to do with having a technocratic mindset?
I think Macron does have he's a very strange character. I think at first he was really appealing to a lot of people as representing a kind of politics of the middle, something very different from old-fashioned Gaullism, but also from the left. But I think the combination of a kind of technocratic centrism, a kind of soullessness with a great deal of political ambition, is not terribly attractive. And some of these key issues that are facing France, Macron doesn't have a lot to say. And so I think putting yourself forward as a barrier to extremism certainly has certain merits for a time. But I think the French as a whole are tired of technocratic elitism, and they're probably tired of the style de Macron, the autocratic bearing, the Jupiterian bearing. Yeah, I think the comparison with the former Prime Minister of Britain is not a bad one, in that neither of them seem to have terribly good political instincts, as you said. And one last comment. National Front won almost 37%, again, with the Republican allies. Labour in England won 33%. And yet it has this massive majority in the House of Commons. So it's a good instructive lesson, something we political scientists talk about in our classrooms. Electoral systems and that kind of thing really, really matter. So people are talking about the échec of the Rassemblement National, but they did better in terms of votes than the Labour Party in Britain. So it's interesting to see how specific electoral systems can affect outcomes.
So I don't know if you want to follow up on that too, but just to throw another question in that I suppose is related to drawing a comparison between Sunak and Macron. Just an additional question for you is, I asked you if Macron might feel vindicated, but there's an additional question, which is really, what was he thinking? What was the strategy? To Eszter.
I think that he had two scenarios in mind. Either the National Rally wins, and in this case, the National Rally can be used kind of before the 2027 election. So, they will have to make difficult decisions. They become more of a party like the others. So they are not just a promise. So I think this using the National Rally was one of these scenarios. And the other scenario was, the National Rally not winning, because there is one advantage that Macron might have thought of, and that is stopping the narrative of the National Rally on the rise. Because after the European parliamentary election, I think there would have been two stories. One story is the rise of the Socialist Party to the detriment of the France Unbowed movement. And the second story is the high percent of votes for the National Rally. And at 9:00 p.m. That evening, he managed to stop that narrative because a new electoral campaign started right away. What I wanted to follow up on is Parliament. I mentioned that the Parliament is going to become a power center, but I would like to go further and elaborate on that. It's going to be a theater, a stage for 2027. Everybody is thinking about 2027. Even Macron thinks about 2027. He cannot run, but his party can, a candidate of his can. So everybody is thinking in this framework, the next election. And with this parliament, if you took a look at the MPs that has been elected, you see quite a few profiles that are potential 2027 candidates, like Laurent Wauquiez on behalf of the Republicans, or even François Hollande, a former president of the Republic who is now an MP from Corrèze. You see other people who are known to be ambitious, like Gabriel Attal, Premier Ministre. So what you're going to see is not just a National Assembly, not just a legislative body, but also a stage for would-be and wannabe candidates for the presidency. And when you have a political stage like that, that stage is not going to be about cooperation. And you have the Socialist Party. You might have heard Olivier Faure, the first secretary, saying that he's ready to become prime minister. So there are ambitions that are coming out. Such a situation is not a situation for cooperation. It's a situation for competition and conflict. And, you know, de Gaulle was a master of political theater. French politics is very affectionate, it's very passionate, and it is often about, you know, this theater aspect. I think we are going to see a lot of this theater in Parliament in the coming years. And what we can safely say, and that's where I close the response with regards to Macron, I think he knows he is at the end of his rule. It's a fin de règne situation. So the next 3 years is going to be about the beginning of the après-Macron. And all the actors in Parliament and in government are going to set the stage for the après-Macron. And it's very difficult because, as Daniel rightly said, the whole constitution is created around the president being at the center of politics and him being the ultimate authority. And that's not going to be a case, even if Macron dissolves again, fires a government if he can, if the situation is like that, because it's not a constitutional right of the president to fire a government. It's a tradition. So we are going to see a lot of interesting things. And I think that we analysts will have a lot of work to explain how this theater works. We are going to see a lot of passion in French politics in the coming years.
I suppose this links to another question I'd have for you, which is that if you're describing a very divided, I suppose, government, but also people jockeying for position with really all eyes on 2027, how stable do you think any new government could possibly be, given all the different disparate parties involved? Do you expect them to be able to form a coalition with Ensemble, for instance?
Well, look, I don't think any of us really know what's going to happen in the next week or so. I think Eszter's right. There's an awful lot of ambition that's manifesting itself, and I sense, you know, I really sense on the left the sense that they deserve it, that Macron and l'Ensemble are losers. They may have done better in terms of the number of seats in the National Assembly than expected, but that this is the left's moment. I don't know if that's a very reasonable interpretation of the election. I think many people on the right feel like the election was stolen through through machinations and that kind of. We're going to hear more of that, and that's going to feed into populism, and it's going to feed into the notion that the centrist elements are kind of bankrupt and they have to do whatever they can to hold on to power. They can hide behind, you know, a moral justification of that they're defending the Republic or the Republican arc, but I think it becomes less and less compelling. So I just don't think the left's going to be willing to accept a coalition where the Macronists play a truly central role. Or the central role. I think, and it's going to be really hard because, as I said before, I'm not sure France Unbowed is going to accept some kind of center-left compromises that crowds them out. And as I suggested before, I think that both the leftist parties and the center behaved in a way that empowered Mélenchon and France Unbowed. It's really hard to say, well, That was last week. That was the week before, but we have a new political situation right now. And don't forget, I mean, I think that Francois Baud is quite militant. There's a revolutionary undertow to many of its partisans, etc. So I'm not so convinced it's going to be easy to form a sort of tolerably centrist, center-left coalition where Ensemble plays a major role. I think the left's going to demand something much more than that. I'm not sure they're going to get it, but they're going to demand it. And that means there may be not only the theater in the National Assembly that Eszter talked about, there could be, this could be a beginning of a period of a great deal of political instability, demonstrations, riots. The first thing you know when you come to France, you're going to learn two words, manifestation, the demonstrations, and grève, the strikes. And the manie, and we're going to see a lot of those. So, it's really interesting at the Place de la République on Sunday night. There was a pro-Hamas a Gaza demonstration, and at 8 o'clock, it turned into a victory celebration. I think that says a lot. And I think that's where the energy on the left is. I know that the socialists did better than expected. I know that there are other elements in the leftist coalition, but I think if they play the game in a way that crowds out the hard left, there's going to be real political consequences.
Thanks, Daniel. Eszter?
The problem is that the math doesn't really add up for any scenario, if I want to be honest, because if you take a look at the scenarios, for example, the left wing, including LFI, could only form a minority government. And part of Ensemble, so the Macron camp, refusing to cooperate with LFI and already threatens with a motion of censure if LFI is part of the government. So the problem is that you cannot add up, you cannot create, if that's the case, a centrist and left-wing coalition, because it can make the center blow up, and that's not in the interest of Macron. The other possibility is kind of a grand coalition without LFI. The problem is that you have to include everyone, even independent MPs from the right and left, if you want it to work, if you want it to be pushed above 289. And right now...
Would that include the Republicans?
Yes.
That would have to include Les Républicains.
Yes. So if you add up everything, the Greens, the Socialists, the Center, the Republicans, divers droite, divers gauche, so independent MPs who can be courted, that maybe gives you 289, so a workable thing, but that's very unstable because these parties do not really agree on anything. So, for example, just one thing, one of the core promises of the Nouveau Front Populaire was the pension reform of Macron to be undone, and the Republicans were very much in favor of this reform, and the Macron camp, which is full of elderly voters who fear for the stability of the pension system, they support it. So you cannot really forge. I mean, mathematically, you might be able to forge such an alliance, but if you want to go on program, and the left says that they want to go on program, then that's going to be very, very difficult. They are going to mutually threaten each other with censure. And I mean, if you take a look at the math, you are going to see that this parliament is not going to be stable. So perhaps one minority government will be formed, but I'm not sure that it's not going to be censured in a few weeks. I mean, the budget is going to be the biggest test, the 2025 budget, because already in the previous National Assembly, it was one of the points of contention. Republicans threatened Macron and the Attal government with censure because of the budget planned for 2025, because they said it's not strict enough. And then you have the left wing with a program which says that they want to increase spending, and yes, they want to increase some taxes. That's very, very far from the ideas of the Republicans. It's very, very far from the ideas of the Macronists. So, I mean, I don't really see, a wide path for pragmatism Because if you want to create a grand coalition, you have to be pragmatic. And you have to find a few issues where you can agree. But in every parliament, there is at least one law that has to be adopted every year, and that's the budget. And they cannot be really pragmatic about the budget because it's at the core of their offer. So I think that there will be a government. How stable it's going to be, it's a very big question. I think there's a big chance that we will see some instability. There is one scenario that might create a sense of stability, which is not stability, and that's the technical government issue. Because a technical government would be nominated and they would have to, find votes for each and every law. But a technical government is often just a caretaker government until the next election. So if we end up with a technical government, then I think that we can, increase our odds on a dissolution in 2025. So it's not going to be easy. I would also say that I don't think we'll, lose a lot on this if we say that in the coming 12 months we are going to see more than one prime minister.
I would just add, Eszter, I think we might be talking about something more radical, like fundamental ungovernability of France for the next year until another dissolution. I mean, I have no doubt you're right that some kind of government would be put forward. I think a technical government would be the worst of all because it would sort of reinforce Macronism, this idea of the sort of technocratic experts. There's something unpolitical about a technical government, and there's something pretty radically unpolitical about the idea of a coalition government with every major force from the moderate left to the moderate right. I mean, you're suspending politics and pretending that there's some kind of overarching unity that is more fundamental than the ordinary contestations of political life. So I think France is going to be pretty ungovernable. It doesn't mean there won't be a government, but it means that the divisions will be implacable and fundamental. And I think Macron, in a way, got France here, and he got France here for his own reasons. But the legacy will be a kind of ungovernability that there's one thing to talk about, the fact that Ensemble has been governing without a majority for a while now. But I think this is a fundamentally new situation, pointing toward a different level of ungovernability.
May I add just one little thing here?
Sure.
I don't think it's going to happen soon, but there's a possibility that if France becomes fundamentally ungovernable, as you just said, then part of the French electorate is going to interpret that not as a political crisis, but as a crisis of a political system. So if parties are not smart about this situation, we can end up with a crisis of the political system, which might be a very interesting situation because this whole system was created around the idea of stability. So if there's a system of the political system, then they will have to, because that's going to be the wish of the electors, they will have to look for a system that is more stable. And theoretically speaking, this semi-presidential system is very stable because the parliamentary system is historically discredited with the Fourth Republic. So, I know that there are concepts around the Sixth Republic, and many on the left want a Sixth Republic, which is more parliamentary, but that is not a political offer that centers around stability. That is a political offer that centers around representativity. And the third option is a full-blown presidential system, a la American. But the problem is that the presidential system is created with very strong checks and balances, which is, it can be very stable, but if the French want swift decisions and authority and, kind of a, ready for action political system that they are used to with the Gaullist system, they are not going to find it in a presidential system. So what I'm going to be watching for is how smart about the political system the parties are, because at the end of the road, down the road, and for right now, far from here, but down the road there is the possibility for a crisis with regards to the political system, and that could be very dangerous for France, because the alternatives wouldn't be able to serve what the electors really want: stability.
So, a question for both of you, which is, I suppose, less structural but more specific. Who do you think will be the next prime minister? I mean, does Macron have an obligation to appoint the candidate of the Nouveau Front Populaire, for instance? And what do you think of the future? And also, what do you think of the future? What future do you see for Gabriel Attal as well?
Eszter, why don't you go first?
Thanks. There is no formal constitutional obligation, so it's a right of the president to appoint a prime minister. But if he doesn't have a majority, a well-controlled majority in parliament, it's in his interest to appoint the one person that the parties say that they can, provide the necessary votes. Because if the president nominates someone who doesn't have the necessary votes, that prime minister can be censured. No formal obligation, but political rationality says that presidents have to kind of nominate the person who has a certain majority. Now, our problem is that there is no person with a majority. So I think it's going to be political pressure from one side to the other and vice versa. So they are going to pressure each other. And the question is, who gives in first?
Yeah, I just don't think that I just don't think the new Popular Front has the kind of moral legitimacy it thinks it has. It has 15 or so more seats than the presidential majority. But it didn't do as well as the National Rally. I think the problem is maybe it makes some sense for Macron and his people to try to put together a coalition, as Eszter was saying earlier, that includes the more moderate elements in the front with elements of the presidential majority. But even that would be very hard to form anything close to a majority. And we come back to that issue I've raised a couple of times, which is whether they know it or not. Both the presidential majority and the non-radical left have given a kind of legitimacy to France Unbowed. And it's not that France Unbowed is in a position to form a government, but they claim the moral authority. They think that any government that doesn't include them and doesn't represent them is morally illegitimate. And I think that cloud, you might say, is going to be hanging around for a long time to come. And it may work itself out more in the streets than in Parliament. But I think it was there was a lot of short-term thinking and calculations on the part of people who ought to have realized that France Insoumise posed, in my view, a greater threat to political moderation and constitutionalism than the National Rally posed. But that's a question about which people can differ. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure Attali will want to be prime minister in these circumstances. I think there's a reason why he resigned. I guess, I really don't know who the next prime minister is going to be. As Eszter had pointed out, we know some people who are already putting themselves forward, who want to play that role, but it's just really difficult to think how anyone could put together a viable majority that is sustainable for more than a few weeks or a few months. So I think we're in one of those moments where people can take guesses, but nobody really knows what's going to happen next.
Looking to the future, or indeed actually reflecting on the past to look to the future, in particular with the National Rally, there is a long-standing trend of them attaining fairly good results in, for instance, the first round, only to have it taken away again as voters mobilize against them in the second round. What do you think accounts for that? Do you think what happened a few nights ago is a continuation of that trend, or is it a different set of circumstances, a different phenomena this time?
I think it's a different phenomenon. I mean, in an earlier session, I quoted Alain Finkielkraut, who's one of France's premier intellectuals, who in an interview with Le Point said he may vote for National Rally to save France from anti-Semitism. No one could say that about the National Rally a half a dozen years ago or a dozen years ago, you know? And so I think the kind of argument that the National Rally poses a fundamental threat to the Republic, that it's outside the Republican arc, I think those arguments become thinner and thinner as time goes on. And maybe this election will be the last major election where something like what happened Sunday night can happen in the same way again. I just think that the de-diabolization of the National Rally will continue. I think the fact that there are other threats to Republican legitimacy and moderation that will become more obvious and evident, et cetera. And so I think there's something artificial about this. I think so many, you could see the split in the Republican Party between, you know, Ciotti and the 15 or so delegates who got elected who were formed an electoral alliance with National Rally, and the sort of the old grandees of the party who were, you know, still thinking like, you know, we've got to stop National Rally. It's the fundamental threat. So I don't know. I think my sense is that this election was different in some ways because of the brazenness of this electoral deal by the major parties of the center and left. And it's also different in that it's unlikely that the kind of reasoning underlying that electoral deal will be as pertinent down the line. Eszter may disagree with me, but I just don't think this constellation of, you know, things is going to hold up. I think sooner or later, my hope is that the Republicans or some other center-right party start dealing with some of these issues that a lot of Frenchmen care about, so that you know, it isn't left to the National Rally, for example, to talk about immigration as a serious issue. So my hope would be that the lesson is not just to drive the National Rally out of respectable politics, but the center becomes more sensitive to some of the populist concerns of French voters. We'll see if that happens.
Eszter?
I see a continuation, because if you take a look at the electoral results of the National Rally in a historic perspective, you see this growing trend. And it happened in 2024 as well. So they have much more members of parliament than before, as I said, from 89 to 143. So that's a huge leap. It's not as big as this party hoped for, but it's a leap. I think they are going to continue with de-diabolisation, because it's a strategy that has been working for the last 20, 25 years, and obviously it yields results, so why stop? I mean, after, you know, obviously I think that they are a little disappointed that they did not win a governmental position, but nevertheless, the result in this historic trend is a growing trend for the National Rally. So I don't see any reason, you know, for stopping the diabolisation. I think they are going to continue on this path. What I'm going to watch is three things that I consider as crucial for the future of the National Rally. One is a technical one. In the French press, they began to openly talk about the errors that has been committed on behalf of the party during this campaign. And it happens often that the National Rally talks about some errors and then they are going to correct it. So, for example, here was this this famous Matignon plan, which was a plan prepared beforehand for a potential dissolution. And for example, one of the things that I'm going to watch out for is whether they are better prepared for a next dissolution or for a next election. So if this Matignon plan is better done than this one, it's one of the topics of today's news with regards to the National Rally, because even Jordan Bardella talked about some of these things. So it's one of the things to watch, whether they continue to correct, the problems that they face, and whether they can go forward. The second, I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion that the French electoral system favors those who can strike alliances. And it was the first time in political history that the National Rally was able to strike an alliance with Ciotti and part of the Republicans. So whether this trend continues, whether Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella are able to find other alliances, it's going to be crucial on the way forward. And the third thing is that Marine Le Pen obviously has an ambition to talk to left-wingers, so to people who are etatists, who want a state that protects them socially, security-wise, etc., etc. So what I'm going to be watching for is whether she's able to continue to build her electorate on this path, because this is one of the paths where she can significantly weaken the communists, La France Insoumise, etc., etc. Talking about security in an economic sense and in a justice sense, in a from a position of etatism vis-a-vis globalization. So these are, and this has been a strategy of Marine Le Pen, a well-founded strategy for the last few years. So I'm going to watch whether she continues on this path. So these are the three things that are crucial for the National Rally strategic-wise. And of course, as analysts, what we can do, all we can do is to, check whether they are continuing on this path and whether they, correct the perceived errors that they see in their political action. I think that we will have a possibility very soon to check how this project goes, because as we said, there's an instability going forward and perhaps a next election in a few months. So we'll see.
And Eszter, I think you're absolutely right. The National Rally has to really think seriously about governing. They cannot simply be a party of opposition. And I think they're going to be judged by by the part of the electorate who might be open to voting them about whether they can provide serious and responsible governance. And by the way, the other thing we ought to notice, a party like France Insoumise, they're not getting their votes from working people. I mean, the working class, a lot of people who used to vote communist are voting National Rally. And so the left, in a way, has abandoned the working class. And that really does provide an amazing opportunity for the National Rally. I think you're right. I think Marine Le Pen has, in addition to knowing that that's politically advantageous, I think she has some authentic desire, that the National Rally can be a party that speaks to France as France, and that means working people too. So we'll see. And I agree with you. I think they're going to have to decide whether they approach things in a spirit of self-correction or they simply blame, as I said before. I think there's going to be a temptation to say they were cheated. And I think that's a very widespread sentiment right now. But I think the deeper response to this setback would be along the lines you suggested.
One final question for both of you, and you've both touched on this, I think, in your comments so far, but looking ahead, I mean, do you think, despite the shock of this, and I'm sure the National Rally will be very disappointed, obviously, with the outcome, but in the long term, do you think this may actually be the best outcome for them now, given that governing at the moment would have been precisely so difficult in a situation of cohabitation? So in the long term, is this probably something that will serve them?
I think so. Oh, Eszter, you go first.
No, please go on.
Okay, I think so. I don't think they were prepared to govern. I think there would have been there would have been immediate violence beginning at the Place de la République. There was some violence, by the way, Victor's violence, but there would have been a semi-hysterical response, denunciations of new fascism and all that. I'm not sure the National Rally was really prepared to govern in any case, and they would have been governing in very difficult circumstances. I also think the loss gives them a chance, to step back, and people can see, look, I think when the Macronists and others respond to François Insoumis by saying, we won't govern with you, you're unacceptable, that really says, look, we're not simply dealing with one group or party that's outside the Republican arc. There are other threats to the future of France. And that, I think, that helps National Rally. They can look if the diabolisation continues. By the way, I don't think it's just a political technique. I think Marine Le Pen really has a political vision that's significantly more responsible and moderate than her father's. So, I think if they had won, they really couldn't have governed. The country would have exploded. And this gives them a chance to, you might say, prepare for the future and allow the public to perhaps see what National Rally represents in a different perspective in light of some of these subsequent developments that we're likely to see.
Thank you, Daniel. Eszter?
I think that Marine Le Pen said 2 days ago that this electoral result is a result that defers the victory of the National Rally. So I think that even Marine Le Pen thinks in this framework. I think that she also banks on instability. So, I mean, it's a possibility for her to, show the others kind of self-destruct in parliament with instability. And I think that if she's not governing, if she's in opposition, she can continue this, construction and the diabolisation. But also she is not in charge of the economy, because the French economy is going to enter some turbulences like this famous excessive deficit procedure. So the next government will be in a very difficult economic situation, even if it's a left-wing government. So I think that there is an advantage for the National Rally where they can remain a promise for 27, where, they are untouched by the problems of governing of the bazaar in parliament. And so they can, continue their work. And my impression is that Marine Le Pen is thinking along these lines. So it's, it's her analysis as well. So what I'm going to watch out for, I always tell you that, is whether she's going to, continue and use this situation in her favor. For example, if she often says that there's a bazaar and there is no stability, no governance, they created an artificial coalition just to stop her from coming to power, but they cannot, be really competent in governing, that's going to be a sign of this strategy happening. So that's what I'm going to be looking out for.
Well, Daniel Mahoney, Soós, Eszter, thank you very much for coming on the Danube Institute podcast to discuss, and retrospectively, everything that's happened the last 2 weeks in France. And we'll have you back on for sure in 2027 for the next one.
That'll be here before we know it, Thanks so much.
Thank you very
so
much.